Welcome to Astro Hi-Fi. My name is Gabby Turner, and in today's video we're going to be looking at the partial solar eclipse that is occurring on October 25th, 2022. This is a part of my ongoing series where I look at each of the new moons and full moons and take into account all of the planetary alignments that are affecting that particular lunation. So of course, a solar eclipse occurs during a new moon. In particular, it occurs during a new moon that happens to occur in proximity to either the north node or the south node. In this case, the sun and the moon are aligning at 2 degrees 0 minutes of Scorpio, which is in close proximity to the south node, which is also currently in Scorpio. We also have Venus showing up for this partial solar eclipse. And I really want to talk a lot about Venus's impact on this eclipse, but also there's an important astrological event occurring 3 days before this eclipse that also involves Venus. You know, she's really along for the ride here. So we have to talk also about the Sun-Venus exact conjunction at 29 degrees of Libra that's going to be happening on October 22nd. So October 22nd, we have the Sun-Venus exact conjunct at 29 Libra. 3 days later, on October 25th, the Sun, the Moon, and Venus all align in Scorpio for the partial solar eclipse. And that alignment is also making some important aspects, such as a trine to Mars in Gemini and a square to Pluto in Capricorn. So in this video, we're going to take all of that into account. But I do kind of want to set it up and lay the foundation for this discussion by first discussing, just the general pattern and the general cycle of Sun and Venus. They have a very interesting cycle. Of course, it involves all, the Sun, Earth, and Venus all together in the way that they relate to each other as Venus and Earth move in their orbits around the Sun. They create a beautiful rosette pattern. So we're going to look at that and talk about what the significance of the Sun-Venus pattern is and how Venus's strength is very heightened during that October 22nd moment where she's in exact conjunction to the Sun, and how she seems to plummet in her strength as she goes into that eclipse alignment. And what does all of that mean? So stay tuned. Let's go ahead and get into it. So there are two ways that we can think about the way that this rosette pattern is formed between the Sun, Venus, and Earth. One of them here is represented by this video from One India News. You see the Sun in the center here. Let's see here. Yeah, you see the Sun in the center, and as the Earth, which is represented by the little blue circle, and Venus, the very light pink circle, move around the Sun in their orbits. If you have a straight line drawn between the two planets at all times, they do over time develop this beautiful rosette pattern. But another way we can think of this rosette pattern emerging is if we think of the Earth being in the center, and from our perspective here on Earth, of course we're orbiting around the Sun, but from our perspective, as we orbit around the Sun appears to move through the ecliptic, which is the band through which all of the zodiac constellations are in. So that's why the Sun appears to be in a different part of the zodiac, right? The same is true of Venus. Venus appears to be, from the perspective on Earth, moving through the zodiac as well. And in her movements through the zodiac, she of course is going to form conjunctions with the Sun along the way. So it's that particular dance between the three planetary bodies that creates this orbital pattern. And something to point out too is that Venus has an 8-year cycle. So when she makes a conjunction with the Sun in a particular sign generally she will return back to that same sign in 8 years. It'll be at a slightly different degree. But of course, over time, she's going to switch into a new sign. And that is what's happening on October 22nd, 2022. She is, for the first time in 150 years, moving her Sun-Venus conjunction from Scorpio, which is where it was 8 years ago, into Libra. So they're going to be conjoining at 29 degrees Libra. So there's a chart that I want to look at so that we can kind of understand that pattern as well, because each of these points, these petals on the flower of this rosette that Venus is creating, is occurring in the same sign. That petal is going to be in the same sign for over 100 years. And then eventually everything will shift into a new set of 5 signs. One at a time. You know, they don't; those shifts of signs don't happen all at once. But the point of the petal that has been in Scorpio is in 2022 going to be shifting into Libra, which is interesting because it is one of the signs that Venus rules, and because of that, she has a lot of strength in that placement. Okay, so this chart from Find Your Venus Starpoint, from SoviaVenus.com, but you can also get this PDF file of this if you want by typing this in. But these colored bands here indicate the signs that the Sun-Venus exact conjunctions are occurring in through time. So we can see right now we have ongoing conjunctions happening every 8 years in Aries. Taurus isn't happening right now. They are happening in Gemini, not in Cancer. They are happening in Leo right now, not in Virgo. And right now, as of October 22nd, they will start happening. You see the band starting here in this sort of pinkish mauve, I don't know what you would call this color. And so Libra is starting. This purplish blue here is the cycle of Scorpio coming to an end. So they do overlap a little bit because on October 23rd, 2026, in 8 years from now, we will see, that's 4 years from now, we will see a conjunction happening again in Scorpio. But that will be the last conjunction that it happens in Scorpio for over 100 years. So you see the Scorpio band is ending here. Sagittarius isn't happening right now, but Capricorn is. So we're going through a shift where the 5 petal points of the Sun-Venus conjunctions are going to be happening in Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, and Capricorn. And Scorpio is being faded out. Now, it's interesting because this is the first time in over 150 years that these conjunctions have happened in the sign of Libra, and astrologer Arielle Gutman has a great take on this. Let me find what she says here about it. She says the last passage through Libra occurred from 1771 to 1880. Certainly we can agree it was an incredible time period of history. With the birth of two new and important democracies following the American and French revolutions, one can only wonder what miracles will be birthed in the coming cycle. Arielle Gutman, and here is the source, her website from which this is quoted. So I think it is interesting that, this Sun-Venus is moving into Libra at a time when the issue of democracy seems to be very fraught. And there are a lot of questions. So this could be a time when, the democracies that exist in the world start to sort of shift and realign themselves, perhaps improve themselves we will see what happens, you know. I mean, I like her optimism here with miracles, but of course we can't, you know, fall prey to the idea that any particular transit is necessarily going to magically improve the world. The world goes through lots of shifts and changes, just like our lives. Sometimes things are good, sometimes things are not so good. Generally, when we're thinking of the world as a whole, there's a lot of both good and bad happening simultaneously. All right, so there's one more final important thing that I want to note about the Sun-Venus cycle. Of course, as I've said multiple times, I think at this point, that conjunction that's occurring on October 22nd, 3 days before the eclipse. So we're going to get into the eclipse itself in a moment, but this is the last thing I want to say about Sun and Venus on the 22nd, is that when Venus forms her conjunction to the Sun, she is in a position that is called Cazimi, which is an excellent and very strengthened position for any planet to be in. It is also something that planets, every planet becomes Cazimi as it moves through its orbit whenever it forms a conjunction to the Sun. But it doesn't generally last for very long because Cazimi can only occur when the planet is within 17 minutes. So you have to remember that minutes are less than degrees. There are 60 minutes for every degree. And each sign has 30 degrees, which means 360 degrees in the entire zodiac. So if Cazimi is just slightly more than 1/4 of a degree, it's a very narrow space that that planet has to be in order to be Cazimi. But it is an excellent strengthener for the planet. So we'll just read here off of this chart that I've created. A planet in Cazimi is very strong. Ancient astrologers likened it to having the attention and the favor, that part of it that is important, of the king. So whatever that planet symbolizes, it can convince the Sun to energetically support its wishes. All the other planets orbit around the Sun, and the Sun is the only planet that emits its own light. So the Sun is quite influential, much like a king. So this metaphor is quite helpful, but please understand that it is indeed a metaphor. So in another sense, Venus, you know, has to do with abundance. She has to do, as the ruler of Libra, and this is where their conjunction is taking place, she also has to do with fairness and diplomacy, making agreements in terms of mundane astrology, which is what we call sort of like world events astrology. It's the technical name for it. Venus represents even things like peace treaties and negotiations or contracts, trade negotiations, things like that. So at a Cazimi point, those types of things can be very strengthened, especially when Venus is in her own sign, where she is also strong. Any planet in its own sign is going to be naturally very strong. And then, in addition, she's going to be in this Cazimi placement. But the thing is, shortly after this, because it's happening at the 29th, the very end degree of Libra that Sun and Venus become conjunct, they're going to both move into Scorpio, and Venus is going to start pulling ahead of the Sun. And she's going to be in a placement that is called Combust. So Combust, and that's what's going to be happening at the eclipse actually, is Venus is going to be in the Combust placement because she's going to be more than 17 minutes away from the Sun, but less than 8 degrees. So when a planet is combust, it is overpowered by the Sun. The light of the Sun obscures it. Therefore, this planet cannot make its intentions known or felt. Some ancient astrologers said that it is like that planet is imprisoned. So, in other words, that planet has the attention of the king, but not in a very favorable way, you know, so the king is not helping you out at all. So again, remember these are metaphors, so we're not necessarily saying that these events are going to have anything in particular to do with kings, although there are obviously kings that exist in the world today. But it's in a more metaphorical sense that, you know, seeking favor from someone of some sort of prominence or importance, someone in a prominent leadership position, someone who has a lot of influence, can happen well on October 22nd during that Sun-Venus conjunction in Libra, because Venusian things, generally speaking, are going to be very favorable in that moment. But immediately, Venus moves into a place where she is not doing very well. All right, so finally we have the chart for the eclipse itself, which is happening again on October 25th, 2022. So we see this alignment here, Sun, Moon, and Venus. And you can see also, as I talked about before, Venus is going to be in the combust position because the Sun and Moon are at 2 degrees 0 minutes, and Venus is at 2 degrees 40 minutes. So she's 40 minutes away from the Sun, and she is in that combust position because of it, which weakens her, and it makes it more difficult for Venusian things to come about. The other thing is, not only has Venus, I mean, this always happens, right? When any planet makes a conjunction to the Sun, eventually they're going to fall into combust. They're also going to be in a combust position in the lead up to that, unless, of course, they're in their own sign, which was the case for Venus leading up to this because she was in Libra, which is her own sign. So she's sort of strengthened and shielded a little bit from that combustion. But when she moves into Scorpio, she's moving into a sign of her detriment, because Scorpio is opposite to Taurus, and Taurus is one of the signs that she rules in addition to Libra. So that placement of, that movement into her sign of detriment and moving into combust all at the same time, it's almost like, it's sort of like something great is happening, and then all of a sudden the other shoe drops. That's the feel that I get initially from this movement from the 22nd to the 25th. Now, I do want to point out that when a transit occurs, it's not usually that we feel the impact of that transit at the exact moment that it happens, and then the next transit we feel at the exact moment that it happens. So it's not like, if you have something in your chart that's close to these degrees and are going to have a personal impact from this, or if we just look at the world at large and what might be happening in the world at large, in response to these transits, it's not like there's going to be something great happening that's very Venusian in a very positive way, like a peace treaty or something. It's not like something like that is going to happen necessarily at all, but certainly not exactly on October 22nd, and it's not like something disastrous is going to necessarily happen 3 days later. But, the energy of these two events on the 22nd and the 25th do create a dynamic where we might be noticing that something really great is happening, and then it's almost like what comes up must come down, and I don't want to be pessimistic, but that is just the energy that I see here from this movement. What we also have here is we have a trine happening. It's an out of sign trine, so normally a trine aspect, which is a very harmonious aspect, is going to be from planets that are in the same element of each other. But Mars here is at the end of Gemini, an air sign, and Sun and Venus and the Moon have just moved out of an air sign, Libra, and they're in the very early degrees of Scorpio, which is a water sign. So they're still within the number of degrees that would allow them to be forming a trine. So anyway, the important thing, I suppose, is that they are in a trine aspect to each other. Now, Mars in Gemini, is just, it's a placement where people are going to be very vocal about their opinions. It can be a time when there's a very rapid news cycle as well, because, Mars just has that energy. It's a very forceful conversations. That's sort of what Mars and Gemini is all about. Assertive. People are very assertive in their communications. There can also be a very assertive media, because Gemini has to do with the media. This trine aspect means that when the eclipse occurs, and again, Venus is very weakened at this point, Venusian things like coming to agreements, making peace with each other, getting along, are going to be difficult in light of this eclipse. And it seems to be that the sort of forceful communications, assertive dialogue that we see with Mars and Gemini is probably going to be adding fuel to that fire pretty easily with the trine aspect. And so that's one thing I see here. We also have, from the solar eclipse, we have a square forming. From, again, this is sort of out of sign, because normally a square would mean well, in any case, it's just the important thing is that there is a square happening here. So you have 30 degrees here of Scorpio, 30 degrees of Sagittarius, and 30 degrees almost of Capricorn. So that makes up the 90 degrees necessary to form a square. And Pluto is in Capricorn, which means that there's a sort of frustration here. Pluto has been in Capricorn since 2008. It has brought such a tremendous intensity to the divide between hierarchies. And some of the terms that we use today, such as the elites, that type of talk was not common before Pluto began its transit through Capricorn. And the general understanding that certain people hold power because of concentrated wealth, even that was not a very common concern before Pluto began this particular transit through Capricorn. It's not like there weren't people in the world who saw it that way, but it certainly wasn't a sort of mass consciousness type of thing that it is now. But in any case, that's sort of what Pluto has been doing throughout its reign in Capricorn. It's coming to the end of that. And it's this square to the eclipse is, again, sort of bringing up issues or aggravating the situation and saying, we have to question why Venusian things are not easy right now. Why is it difficult for people to have access to fuel? Why is it difficult for people to just have, access to, the basic economic resources that they need? What's happening economically in the world? Because Scorpio has to do with things like shared resources and the ways that having access to resources that might be seen as belonging to all of us gives power to certain people. So, for example, when tax monies are collected, who gets to decide how those tax monies are actually spent? That is an issue that I can see being brought up especially strongly with this square, because again, Pluto in Capricorn has to do with hierarchies and hierarchies of control. And also Venus in Scorpio has to do with fairness when it comes to shared wealth, or how wealth is empowered or disempowered. So those are kind of the major themes. Again, so just to sort of summarize here, there's an energy of things going really well and everything looking very rosy and promising on the 22nd with that Sun-Venus conjunction. And then all of a sudden, what felt so promising seems to fall apart. So it might be like, as an example of how this could play out in an individual's life, Of course, this is just an example. It doesn't mean that this is going to be necessarily happening to anyone watching, but what if you got an excellent job offer and this was a company and you knew it was a great company, you got the job offer, and then you found out that actually the job offer was not as good as what you had expected because this company, unbeknownst to you, is actually going through difficult times. And so maybe their starting salary is a lot lower than what it would have been before. And, you may not be in a position to have other options available to you. So you'd always wanted to work for this great company, then you get to work for them and you find out that the conditions for you are just not going to be what you thought they were. It's just an example. But yeah, so that's what I see going on here. We do also have in a couple of weeks a total lunar eclipse that's going to be happening exactly in conjunction to Uranus, which at that point, because it's going retrograde, is going to be at 16 degrees of Taurus. And that's very interesting. A lot of astrologers have been taking note of that lunar eclipse. I believe that is going to be November 8th that the eclipse itself is taking place. So, basically we can expect to see a dramatic increase in all of the things that Uranus and Taurus has been bringing us through its transit, especially as it has been in close proximity to the North Node, which brings challenges. And what does Uranus and Taurus bring us? Uranus likes to shake things up and break things down, and to create instability and to break down structures that it feels are no longer necessary or working. And it's doing so in the sign of Taurus, which is a sign that likes to have stability and, physical comforts. Taurus is ruled by the bull, or, it's the animal associated with it is the bull. Bulls just want to graze in an open field. They don't worry. By the time, it's like if I eat the grass here, I'm going to eat it to the end of the field. By the time I come back around, that grass will have grown back up. So Taurus is a sign that has a very, kind of like slow and steady, methodical and stable approach to life. But the other thing is, it's hard to get Taurus worked up, or the bull worked up. But when you get a bull worked up, it's also going to hold on to that, anxious or angry energy as well, because it is a fixed sign. So it holds into a certain energy once it gets into that. If things are smooth sailing, things are going to be smooth sailing for a while. If things are turbulent in Taurus, they kind of stay turbulent. And so Uranus is obviously bringing a lot of turbulence, again, in relation to things like supply chain demands and just access to basic resources, things like that we very clearly can see going on in the world. We can see the evidence of these planetary movements very clearly right now. So I hope that this was in some way informative and helpful. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know what the final takeaway is. I feel, if you're someone who wants to take advantage of the beautiful Venusian energies on the 22nd, find some way to do that. Celebrate that moment, because that is a beautiful moment. And as Arielle Gutman pointed out, that beginning cycle in Libra will hopefully bring more fairness and justice into the world in some way or other. So we'll see. In 8 years from now, we'll see that conjunction happen in Libra again. So, and it'll continue to be there for over 100 years. All right, guys. So thank you so much for watching, and I wish you the best. Bye-bye.